Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be going back in time to 1940s Ethiopia.
Ooh, very cool.
Yeah, using some declassified CIA documents as our guide. And it all kind of revolves around this Swiss businessman, Emil Buehrle, who seems to have had some pretty big plans for the country.
It is fascinating to see how business and politics kind of all get intertwined in this post-World War II era, especially for a country like Ethiopia, which was trying to both modernize and assert its independence.
Right, yeah, and our main source for this deep dive is this CIA report from April 1949. And the report really focuses on Emil Buehrle, who at the time was the head of Oerlikon, a pretty major Swiss arms manufacturer. But what's interesting is that he seems to have been interested in a lot more than just weapons.
That's right. The report highlights Buehle's interest in trying to establish a cotton industry in Ethiopia. He even went so far as to secure a concession in 1948 for this.
Okay, I got to admit, I'm not exactly an international business tycoon.
Sure.
So what exactly does a concession mean in this context?
So in this case, a concession basically means that Buehrle was granted certain rights and privileges for developing the cotton industry, like giving him exclusive access to land or resources.
Ah, so trying to corner the market, so to speak. What exactly was he proposing?
Well, his proposal was, to put it mildly, quite audacious. He wanted a 20-year monopoly on all cotton manufacturing in Ethiopia, no import duties or taxes on cotton for a decade. And here's the kicker, he wasn't even required to grow any cotton in the country.
Wow. That's a pretty bold ask. Was this kind of monopoly a common thing back then, especially when dealing with countries that were considered developing?
It wasn't entirely unheard of. Many powerful companies, especially ones from industrialized nations, fought similar arrangements in countries that were trying to build up their economies after, colonization or war.
Okay, so how did Ethiopia react to this proposal? It doesn't sound like a very balanced deal.
You're right to be skeptical. The Ethiopian Ministry of Commerce initially rejected the proposal. Most likely they saw it as overly advantageous to Buehrle and not really in Ethiopia's best interests. But here's where things take a bit of an unexpected turn.
Ooh, I love a good plot twist.
Yeah, so according to the report, Emperor Haile Selassie himself got involved and overruled the Ministry of Commerce.
Whoa.
He ordered them to actually draft a revised agreement that would be more acceptable to Buehrle.
Wow, the emperor stepping in personally. That definitely suggests that this deal was pretty important to him. Do we know why?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? Was it purely about promoting economic development, or were there some other political factors at play? The report mentions a possible ulterior motive for Buehrle's interest in Ethiopia, and it has to do with a possible unpaid debt. Apparently, he had sold some Oerlikon guns to Ethiopia back in 1935, and the bill was never settled.
So this cotton venture could have been a way for Buehrle to collect on that old debt. It almost sounds like he was holding their economic development a bit hostage.
It's a strong interpretation, but it's certainly a possibility. The situation really highlights a challenge for newly independent nations. Like, they need foreign investment, but it can often come with these strings attached. And that can give individuals like Buehrle a lot of influence.
So Buehrle was really a master strategist in a way, using his business and political connections to get himself into a very lucrative position. But this wasn't the only thing that he had his sights set on in Ethiopia, was it?
Not at all. The report also mentioned that Buehrle was interested in getting involved with Ethiopia's telecommunications infrastructure. He met with officials from the Ministry of Posts, Telegraphs, and Telephones to discuss possible investments in expanding the country's telecom network.
Wow, from cotton to telecoms, this guy really had a vision for Ethiopia's future, even if it was one that heavily favored his own interests. So what was his plan for this telecom project?
His plan was to bring in a German company, Siemens and Halske, to handle the expansion. And this detail adds another layer of complexity, bringing in another major international player.
This is starting to feel like we're unraveling a real-life spy thriller.
A little bit.
You've got this web of characters, potentially shady dealings, and a powerful businessman at the heart of it all, but let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Right, we got a lot more to unpack here. It'll be interesting to see how all these players influence Buehrle's plans and what impact, if any, his actions actually had on Ethiopia's development.
So last time we kind of left off with Buehrle juggling these ambitions in both cotton and telecommunications. But the CIA document also gives us some information about the people surrounding him, which I think might help us understand his goals a bit better.
You're absolutely right. It's not just about Buehrle himself. It's about the whole network of individuals who are involved in all these negotiations.
So who were some of these key players?
Well, there's this intriguing character named David Halle. And the report describes him as kind of like a middleman, someone who was really actively trying to facilitate Buehrle's investments in Ethiopia. It seems like he might have been the one to initially encourage Buehrle to pursue these opportunities there.
That's interesting. Was Haile working directly for Buehrle, or was he, like, representing the Ethiopian government? What exactly was his role?
The document isn't entirely clear on that point. He could have been acting as like a consultant or even just an independent broker, perhaps someone who just saw the potential for profit in connecting European businesses with developing countries like Ethiopia.
So a bit of a wild card then. This Haile character definitely adds another layer of intrigue to this whole story. Were there any other notable figures in Buehrle's inner circle?
Yeah, there was this guy, Dr. Carlo Fleischmann, Buehrle's business associate. He actually accompanied him on his trip to Addis Ababa in March 1949. And what's interesting is that Fleischmann had his own business interests in Ethiopia, specifically in grain and insurance.
So it wasn't just a casual business trip for Buehrle. It sounds like he brought a whole entourage, each with their own agenda.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder how all these different interests might have converged or even crashed during the negotiations. It definitely adds another layer of complexity to this.
The report also mentions the few Ethiopians who were involved in these discussions, right? What can you tell us about them?
Unfortunately, the document only names a few individuals, and it doesn't really give us much background information. For example, there's a mention of two officials from the Ministry of Posts, Telegraphs, and Telephones Ban and Desh. And they were the ones who actually met with Buehrle to discuss this telecom expansion project.
It would be really fascinating to know your perspective on these proposals. Were they enthusiastic about Buehrle getting involved, or were they more skeptical of his motives?
Yeah, we don't really get those insights from this particular document, which, mainly focuses on Buehrle's activities. But it's important to remember that the Ministry of Commerce did initially reject Buehrle's proposal for the cotton.
Right, so there must have been some debate within the Ethiopian government about how to approach these foreign investment proposals. Perhaps different factions had competing interests.
Absolutely, and this situation really highlights the challenge that a country like Ethiopia faced navigating this post-colonial world. On the one hand, they needed foreign investment to modernize and develop their economy, but on the other hand, they didn't want to be exploited or become too dependent on foreign powers. It was a very difficult balancing act for them.
It makes you wonder if Buehrle was trying to exploit this tension using his wealth and his connections to try to gain a foothold in this strategically important region.
That's a really sharp observation, and there's another detail in the report that might support that idea. Remember those 3 investigators that Buehrle sent to Addis Ababa in early 1949?
Yes, the document mentioned that they actually returned to Switzerland before Buehrle even arrived. What was their purpose?
Well, we can only speculate, but it's possible that they were gathering intelligence, assessing the situation on the ground before Buehrle made his move. Perhaps they were looking into market conditions, political dynamics, potential competitors.
So Buehrle was doing his homework. He wasn't just jumping into these ventures blindly. He was sending in advance teams, gathering information, strategizing. It really sounds like something out of a spy novel.
It certainly adds an element of mystery and intrigue to this whole story, doesn't it? It kind of reinforces this image of Buehrle as not just a businessman, but like a calculated political operator playing a very high-stakes game on an international stage.
This is getting more and more interesting. We've got this web of intrigue, competing interest, and this powerful businessman right at the center of it all. But we still don't know the outcome of Buehrle's Ethiopian adventures. Did he actually succeed in getting his cotton and telecom deals?
Those are the million-dollar questions, and unfortunately, this particular CIA document kind of leaves us hanging. It's just a snapshot of this specific moment in time.
So where do we go from here? How can we find out more about, the conclusion of this story and how these events might have shaped Ethiopia's development?
That's where things get really interesting, I think. We need to do some more digging. Search some historical archives, look for additional documents, explore other sources like diplomatic correspondence or company records. It's like embarking on our own historical investigation.
I am up for the challenge. This deep dive has become a quest to uncover the truth behind Buehrle's ambitions in Ethiopia. Who knew that a few declassified CIA documents could be so captivating?
It just goes to show that history is full of surprises, and sometimes the most intriguing stories are hidden in plain sight, just waiting to be uncovered.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a really great starting point for their own explorations. Who knows, maybe some of them will be inspired to kind of delve deeper into this story and unearth even more fascinating revelations. But for now, let's move on to part 3 of our deep dive, where we're going to explore some potential avenues for further research, and we'll try to piece together the missing pieces of this historical puzzle. It's amazing to think we've spent all this time tracing Emil Buehrle's ambitions in Ethiopia. Just from this one CIA document, it really is like we've uncovered this historical mystery.
Yeah, it's definitely compelling, but like you said, it's a mystery with some missing pieces. We still don't know for sure if he secured those deals for cotton and telecom or whether he ever got paid for those guns from the 1930s.
Right. And what about the even bigger picture? Did his activities actually have any lasting impact on Ethiopia's development? Did he help or hinder their progress?
Those are really the million-dollar questions.
So where do we even begin to look for those missing pieces?
Well, I think a good place to start would be the archives of Buehrle's company or Lacan. They might have more records of his business dealings in Ethiopia, including things like correspondence contracts, financial statements.
Ah, that makes sense. Company records would be a goldmine to figure out how those deals were structured and negotiated. Where else could we look?
We could also look into the Swiss diplomatic archives, because Buehrle was the Swiss honorary consul general, so there might be official communications about his activities in Ethiopia.
Oh, right. Diplomatic correspondence could show us the Swiss government's role. Did they actually support Buehrle's ventures, or were they just observing from afar?
Exactly, and to really understand the Ethiopian perspective, we could look into their own government archives from that time period. There might be records of their negotiations with Buehrle, internal debates about his proposals, or any final agreements they may have reached.
Wow, it's like we're piecing together a historical jigsaw puzzle, one document at a time. It really makes you wonder how many other hidden stories are out there just waiting to be uncovered.
This whole deep dive has definitely shown that even seemingly obscure events can be full of intrigue and these unexpected connections. Who would have thought a Swiss arms manufacturer would be so involved in Ethiopia's post-war development?
It really reminds us that history is never just a collection of boring facts. It's about the choices people made and the actions they took, like Emil Buehrle, and how individuals can sometimes really impact the course of events.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a great place to start their own explorations. Maybe some of them will even dig deeper and uncover some more fascinating details.
And all our listeners out there, we leave you with this. If a single declassified CIA document can take us on such a captivating journey, imagine what other countless hidden stories are waiting to be discovered. Happy exploring.